Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first chapter lecture, Chapter 1. So, this semester we're going to be looking at the study of human development. And what does that mean? As you probably know in your everyday life, humans aren't one-dimensional. They're very complex. There's very many things that make up who we are. So, we're going to take a look at that this semester. And this first chapter, we're going to start to understand how and why the study of human development. So let's take a look. We'll begin by going over the objectives of this chapter. So let's think about the study of human development asks some of life's most basic questions. How did your life begin, and how did you grow from a single cell into a complex adult? How will you influence other people's lives and they yours? How will the various roles in your life shape your development? And how will you deal with death, your own as well? All these things and all these questions make up our development. Through this class, we're also going to learn to know the fundamental issues of development that scholars have addressed throughout history. We're going to identify basic forces in the Biopsychosocial Framework, and you guys are going to understand what that means. And then you're going to understand how neuroscience enhances our understanding of human development. Human development is the multidisciplinary study of how people change or stay the same over time. Let's take a look at this picture. What do you see? You see an elderly person? Right. This is Jean Calment. She lived to be 122 years, 164 days. She met Vincent van Gogh. She saw the invention of the light bulb. She saw automobiles, airplanes, space travel, computers all come to fruition. She fenced at 80, bicycled at 100, and she lived on her own to be 110. So even though she lived a long time, she also had a very high quality of life for about 110 years of that. So that makes me want to ask you guys this question. What's more important, to live a long time or to live a shorter time, but be able to do more, have more quality of life? I want you to think about right now what things you've experienced. What do you think you might experience? I want you to think, how long do you want to live? And what factors into that? What has shaped and influenced you over time? Those are some of the questions I want you to keep in your mind as we do this semester and learn about human development, because it's about you, it's about me, it's about everybody else around us. So let's begin to look at human development, and let's break it down into periods of development. We're very different from when we're young to when we're old, and that's what we're going to study this semester. So let's take a look and see what those definitions mean. So the first thing we want to look at on that side, we have prenatal to late adulthood. And this on the right side gives you the time frame of that. So as we talk about the theories that we're going to talk about this semester and through this chapter, you want to look and be able to understand the term with the age equivalent. So you can understand the behaviors that are associated with each period of development. So let's look at this. Prenatal is conception to birth. Infancy and toddlerhood is birth to 2 years. Early childhood is 2 to 6. Middle childhood is 6 to 11. Adolescence 11 to 18. Early adulthood 18 to 40. And middle adulthood 40 to 65. And late adulthood is 65 years to death. So think about Jean. She had almost 60 years in late adulthood. As long in one period of development as all the other ones combined. Crazy to think about that. So as we progress through this class and this chapter, we need to establish some definitions. So the first one is growth, which is an increase in physical size. You have development, which is the acquisition of skills and function, and maturation, which is the total process in which skills and potential emerge regardless of practice or training. So think about as you mature, right? You become 8, you become 9, you become 10, you grab skills, your body changes. You have skills, you can jump farther, you can now balance on one leg. Those skills come regardless of practice, just as because you're maturing and your body is growing. So let's look at the major domains of development. So when you're thinking about development, you want to think about breaking it down. We develop in different parts, right? So we have physical development, cognitive development, and emotional and social development. And bringing all those together makes it the whole human development. So physical development is changes in your body size, proportions, the way you look, your growth, your perception, your motor skills, and your physical health. Your cognitive development is going to look at how your intellectual abilities are, including your attention and memory, your imagination, how creative, the way you are able to understand and speak language, your problem solving. And then last is your emotional and social development. So those are changes in your emotional communication, how you understand yourself and how you understand other people, the way you speak with other people, your interpersonal skills, your friendships, your intimate relationships, and how you morally reason or see the world, and how you behave with that reasoning. We're going to be looking at all of these as we study development in the human. So this is a picture that illustrates that concept. So this is what they're talking about when you're going to hear that lifespan view of development. So what does that mean? That means that we change or we develop over our life. So a 1-year-old is way different than an 80-year-old. So this tree illustrates that. So you're seeing the physical, cognitive, and emotional trees. And then as you age, you're going to increase in those developmental skills. You see adulthood is really high and infancy is really low, which would make sense. So when you're thinking of development and you're thinking about the people around you, a lifespan view of development is just showing a direct relationship of as you age, you're going to develop more you're going to get taller, stronger, you're going to get more intelligent, you're going to speak better, and you're going to demonstrate better communication, better interpersonal skills. That is the lifespan view of development. Let's look at some recurring issues in human development. I want you to think about your life. Is everything straightforward, super easy? No, probably not. That wouldn't be a very interesting life, right? So when we look and study life and human development, we have to realize that it's not simple. And there are many things that make up your fundamental characteristics, make up who you are. So what we're going to look at now is, what does that mean? Why do you do the things you do, and how do things affect you? So let's consider 3 pairs of fundamental characteristics of human development. I want you to think about yourself or someone you know when you're learning these concepts. Try to attach it to a person or someone that in your life or you've seen in a movie that shows the examples of these concepts, and that will help you understand and understand them better. So the 3 we're going to look at, and these are the 3 pairs of fundamental characteristics of human development, and it is nature and nurture, continuity and discontinuity, universal and context-specific development. So that's a lot of fancy words, but we're going to look at the next slides and really understand them. So let's begin with the basic issue. So have you heard of the concept nature versus nurture? So basically what that means is, what are you born with? So your heredity information versus what has the environment or society influenced you to be. So when we think of nature, we think of heredity. What did you get from your parents? The DNA, all those things that are already kind of like a computer. You already got your hard drive in there. They're just going to come out. That's the nature aspect. The nurture is the physical and social forces. So how were you raised? What were your parents? How did your parents raise you? What school did you go to? What city did you live in? If you lived in Bakersfield versus New York City, that's going to nurture you. That's going to influence in how your behaviors. You have biological, psychological, and developmental influences. So we're going to take a look at that. But the basic core of nature versus nurture is, if you want to think nature, is your hard drive inside you. It's the DNA, the cells, the stuff, the information that you got from your parents. And nurture is all the environment, all the outside forces that can make you who you are. So let's take a look at the nature versus nurture issue. So remember, nature is your pre-wiring, your eye color, your height, your hair, your athletic ability, your artistic ability. Nurture is the things that are influenced by the environment. They are their exposure or your influences to external factors, your life experiences. So when we ask the question, why do people in certain careers have a lot in common? And how do nature and nurture's influences a person's choice to be a professional baseball player? So that's a great example. So if you look at a baseball player, are they a professional baseball player because they have that innate talent and regardless of their life exposure, they would become that? Or they didn't have that talent and they were just exposed and was able to exposed to great training all throughout their life and then became a professional baseball player? Well, it's not quite that simple, right? So when we think about professional baseball players, they have to have the innate talent, but they also have to have the environment to nurture that talent. So you take a innately talented baseball player and you put him in with parents that are farmers that don't know anything about baseball and he never played. Do you think he would still become that great baseball player? Is it solely just the nature because he has this innate talent? Or do you need the nurturing, the environment, the life experiences to foster that talent? Is it not just enough to have the characteristics or the talent, but you also need the environment? So it's not straightforward, and research has been unable to prove that it's nature or nurture. And it's probably a little bit of both, right? Look at your baseball players. How many father-son combinations are there in baseball? Would they have that same son and made it if their parents were somebody else? But because they lived in a household where their parent was a baseball player, a professional player, think of all the experiences they had to nurture that talent. So it's something that people are going to debate for years. So think about your life. What do you have that from your parents that innately make you are? And think about the influences. If you were put in a different scenario, if you lived in New York, would you still be the same person that you are? So let's take a look at the next two fundamental characteristics of human development. The first one I want to look at is continuity versus discontinuity issue. So, do you stay the same or do you change as you develop? Continuity is the smooth progression throughout the lifespan. You're going to stay the same during all your formative years. What that means is if you're a 5-year-old and you're outgoing and you're friendly, you're going to be that outgoing, friendly person at 6, at 7, at 10, at 12, at 42. No time during your development did that personality trait ever change. You're outgoing, you're friendly, that's continuity. You're progressing smoothly and you're staying the same. Versus discontinuity. Are you having changes along the way? A series of abrupt shifts. So let's think of that same scenario. You're a toddler, a 2 or 3-year-old, you throw tantrums, you get mad. But at 7, 8, you get over that. You do much better. You become friendly, outgoing. You hit your teenage years. You go back to that moody, introverted self. At 21, you get over that and you become more reasonable, more friendly again. You're seeing that at different phases of the development, you hit your toddlers, you hit your adolescents, you're hitting your young adult. You're changing the way you act. So that's discontinuity. So think about the people in your life, or even you. Have you been the same through your whole life? Or have you had episodes where you've changed depending on the year of development, what phase of development you're in? I know I have a brother who got in trouble all the time in junior high. Now he's the calmest kid ever. Calmest adult ever. So that would be discontinuity. He didn't stay the same. So we're probably a little bit of both, right? But we might have a tendency to stay the same through some aspects of our development, but have discontinuity in other aspects. The last one here is universal versus context-specific issue. So we're looking at, is there just one developmental path or are there several? So universal development, several paths to development. So the book example gives you formal education in the US, like we're doing right here, versus learning mathematics and learning counting by real life tasks. Like maybe in a country where, that the children don't go to school early, but they go out and they buy and they sell produce. and they understand that the value and the exchange of money through that actual process of using it. They didn't sit in class and understand that 2 plus 2 equals 4. They actually took 2 melons and they took another 2 apples and they realized that together I can count to 4. So that is a universal. So we can learn it in a formal way, or you can learn it in a life experience way. But you're learning the same concept, but learning it in different ways. Context-specific issue means that there's only one path of development. So it's unique to the environment or to the person. So if we live to a country that you have to learn how to do, a specific form of, of making some kind of textile or making some kind of object, and you can only learn it by one path, one way you can do it. You couldn't learn it in school, you couldn't learn anything, you had to learn it in that exact context. Then that would be context-specific learning. It's unique to the environment. I can't go anywhere in the country but learn how to do this one certain task because they're the only ones who have the material, they're the only ones who have the correct living environment for it. That is very unique to the situation. It is context-specific. Universal, I can learn the same concept. So we think about math, but how I can learn it in different ways. I can learn it formally, or I can actually learn it in a real life scenario. But I'm learning the same concept. So think about how you've learned. We probably do mostly, obviously, universal concepts. But think of the world around us. How much context-specific has been learned around the world, and how do we relate to those, that learning? So now let's look at the 4 interactive forces that affect development. You really want to understand these because you're going to be utilizing them throughout all the stages of development. And you want to understand how they interact. So what they are, because this will definitely be a test question. Biological forces, psychological forces, sociocultural forces, life cycle forces. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's look at biological forces. Biological forces are heredity, our genetic code, and lifestyle factors. So that's what happens prenatally, so when you're still in your mom's womb, and the environment that affects you. So genetics, lifestyle. So if you're healthy, if you exercise, if you don't exercise, how that affects your health. How your lifestyle choices, if you smoke, if you don't smoke. That is all biological forces. Your psychological forces consist of your personality, your intellect, if you're honest, if you're your moral code. That's your psychological forces. It's who you are, your innate personality, the way you see the world, and how you think. Your sociocultural forces is your community. We don't just develop in a bubble, right? So we all develop in the world communicating with others in a larger system. So that sociocultural is your parents and siblings, your teachers and friends, your school acquaintances. And then the lifestyle forces, now this is the concept. It's time. Timing is everything. So when you think of life cycle forces, the key word is timing is everything. So basically is all those 3 components, but what phase in life are you? So we give an example of you have a pregnant woman. A life cycle force would be, okay, let's look at her at 16 and got pregnant and look at her at 30 and got pregnant. Her life cycle forces are going to be a lot different. The 16-year-old is going to have a lot more, adversity to overcome, right? She's going to still be in high school, maybe not have education, not have money. Whereas a 30-year-old, she may have a good job. She has the resources. She can get good prenatal care. So timing is everything, right? So those biological, psychological, and sociocultural forces that affect the 16-year-old pregnant woman is going to be a lot different than affects the 30-year-old pregnant woman. So that's what life cycle forces is timing is everything. What phase in the development of your life are those forces occurring? And what does that mean? What does it look like? So the interaction of these forces is known as the Biopsychosocial Framework. So that's what you want to think about. So you're going to be looking, as we go through this class, we're going to be taking these concepts and looking at every stage. So you really want to understand how these four interact and what they are, so that when we get to every stage, we can apply that and look at that development from the perspective of this biopsychosocial framework. So it's how biological forces, psychological forces, and sociocultural forces affect the person in a specific time in their life. So this picture just illustrates what I just talked about. So you're looking at the biopsychosocial framework, and you're going to see it. You're going to see all four components compared. So you have this gentleman when he was a toddler, an adolescent, and a maybe young adult. And you're going to see the biological forces, the sociocultural forces, and the psychological forces. And the life cycle forces is that timing. So then that's the change in his age. So this is a great picture, and kind of visualize this when you're thinking of that biopsychosocial framework. So let's take a look now at neuroscience. For years, psychologists have only been able to observe behavior and study behavior on the outside. Now with technology, we're actually being able to look at the brain and see what the brain is doing when we're doing these behaviors. So neuroscience is the study of the brain and nervous system, especially the brain behavior relationship. Neuroscience is beginning to unlock and explain the developmental occurrences like memory loss in the older adult and high-risk behaviors of adolescents. They look at memory loss in the frontal cortex. They can actually see on an MRI, or what is a functional MRI, what is happening when you do memory tests. So a functional MRI actually looks at the brain while you're doing some kind of function. They can also look at that high-risk behaviors of adolescents, and that's a pre-inhibition development phenomenon. It's a specific nuclei in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, we'll learn all about this stuff later, but it is your behaviors, it's your inhibition, it's the cortex that tells you to do something or not do something. And so when they can see that in the functional MRI, when they're looking at a picture of a high-risk activity, they can see in those child's brain that those areas light up. So they can actually see the brain activity matching the behavior. And it gives them a better understanding of the forces or the explanation of the behavior. So think about in the 40s when they were doing all these, behavioral and psychological experiments. Everything was observation or experience. But now we can actually see that the brain is making all these changes. It's very, very exciting. And you can see that these methods, they include the molecular analysis of the brain through those imaging techniques. And the imaging techniques are one of the most important ones is the functional MRI, because it looks like the MRI takes a picture of your brain, and what it does is it takes a picture of your brain while you're doing an activity, the function that you're trying to measure. Let's take a look now at developmental theories. Why do people have their own specific characteristics? What makes us who we are? Why are we unique, and why are we different? So what do you believe is the reason each of you are the way you are? Do the habits you have developed come from years of following the path set by parents and the trend just stuck? Is it that it's all you know, so you keep continuing that behavior? Or is there something about you that makes you act and do as you do? Or did you dislike something in your childhood or your formative years so much that you determined as an adult you would never do that again? I'm sure we can all think of things that we said, I will never be like my parents. I will never do that ever to my child. That thought process is what a theory is. It's coming up with an organized set of ideas and making an assumption off of it. So we're going to look at 5 general theories of human development: psychodynamic theory, learning theory, cognitive developmental theory, ecological and systems theory, lifespan perspective, and related theories. A lot of big words, but we're going to go over all of them. So what I really want you to remember is that anybody can have a theory. It's just taking an idea off an organized set of ideas. Now, whether that theory has validity or has merit is something that you'll look at. But I have a theory, you can have a theory, nursing has theories, science has over 40 different system theories. So theories are just a set of organized ideas. We're going to actually look at the theories and see what they mean. What I want you to remember is that each of these theories that we're going to be looking at have a differing view, have a different idea than their fellow psychology colleagues. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It is just a different perspective. So we want to think of it as we look at these theories. They're not one is necessarily right and not one is wrong. They're just a different perspective, a different way to look at something. We can always see, coin from two sides. So the same thing about human behavior. There's not one size fits all. We have lots of different theories that are stronger in some aspects and weaker in others, but by utilizing all of them, we can get the whole picture of human development. So we're going to begin going over all these theories, and I want you to make sure that you really understand and pay attention to them because they're going to be used throughout this whole course. You're going to take each of these theories and you're going to apply them in different stages of the development. So it's important to understand who the people are involved and what each theory main components are. So we're going to begin with the psychodynamic theory, and it believes that development is determined by how well people resolve conflicts faced at different ages. The key theorists are Erikson and Sigmund Freud. And the one that we're going to be studying is Erikson, and we'll talk about Freud in a little bit. Erikson's theory of development is based on the epigenetic principle of psychosocial stages. So each psychosocial strength has its own period of particular importance. So let me go over this a little bit. A lot of fancy words there. Let's break this one down. So a psychodynamic theory is a view that explains personality in terms of conscious and unconscious forces. Psychodynamic theories commonly hold that childhood experiences shape personality. So it's as the things that you experience in your childhood will help develop who you are as a person. Such theories are associated with psychoanalysis, so a type of therapy that attempts to reveal unconscious hypnosis, right, thoughts and desires. Not all psychologists accept psychodynamic theories, and critics claim that the theories lack supporting scientific data. So basically, what we're going to learn about Erikson, and we'll talk a little bit more in the next slide, is that he has 8 stages of the psychodynamic theory. And as you progress through each stage is partly determined by the success or lack of success in the previous stage. So each stage you're going to have, and this is this epigenetic principle. So each stage, so say you're in the toddler stage, you're going to have some kind of challenge that comes that forces you to react, to develop a psychological perspective. So if you flourish and you can go through that stage and accomplish it, then you can go to the next stage. And if not, then there will be complications from that. So you want to think of Erikson and his 8 stages of the epigenetic principle. When you're thinking of Erikson, that's what you want to think of. 8 stages, epigenetic principle, childhood experiences shape personality. It's how we resolve conflict at different stages. So those key terms when you're taking tests or when you're looking at him, you want to think of that. Now let's talk about Freud. Why aren't we discussing Freud more, right? Everybody knows Freud. And the reasons are, even though he was known as the father of this psychodynamic theory, many of his assumptions and methods have been brought into question since the beginning of his work. Freud's argumentative theories and methods, his focus on human sexuality, his treatment practices, his emphasis on adults, and his lack of empirical evidence. So not a lot of evidence, a lot of his own opinions have made him not be as credible in this theory. And feminists have been highly critical of many of Freud's concepts, arguing that the assumptions and approaches of psychoanalytic theory are profoundly prejudiced against women. So that's why, even though Freud is the father of psychodynamic theory, Erikson is the one we think about because he has more evidence, more experiments, more credibility in this. So we think of Erikson with psychodynamic theory. So now let's put it all together. So this is Erikson's psychodynamic theory. So remember that you have the stage, you have the age, and you have the challenge, because Erikson's theory is that childhood experiences shape personality. So you're going to know these stages inside and out. So you want to understand the stage, the age, and what that challenge is. So first stage is basic trust versus mistrust. So you think about your birth to 1-year-old, right? They're building that trust. It's mostly the parent and the child. So they have to develop a sense that the world is safe and a good place. So basic trust and versus mistrust. How do you build that? When they cry, you pick them up. When they're hungry, you feed them. They're trusting that that other person is going to meet their needs. Very basic. The second stage is autonomy versus shame, and that's 1 to 3 years old. And the challenge that in this stage is to realize that one is an independent person who can make decisions and doubt. So you think about your toddler, right? They start to realize, oh, I can take that candy out of that candy jar. Oh, I can actually go and go into my mom's purse and get some candy. So, but then they realize, oh, they're starting to realize I can do those things, but they can come with consequences. So that's autonomy versus shame. The third stage is initiative versus guilt. And this is your 3 to 6 year old. So with all these stages, try to picture that child. And I'll show you some videos later on showing these skills, but not in this chapter. We'll go on as we get to the actual ages. I'll show you some videos. So you want to think of that initiative versus guilt. So they begin to develop the ability to try new things and to handle failure. So maybe they will jump off that step, but then they fall and hit their knee. So they're going to, try to make a basket in the basketball hoop, but they don't make it. So it's balancing that initiative versus failure and guilt, like they should be able to do it. The next stage is industry versus inferiority, and that's 6 years to adolescence. And this is where you're learning your basic skills to work with others. So you're feeling like I'm really confident in this skill, and then they realize I'm not so good at that skill. So it's getting that confidence and realizing and learning it. So learning a skill and getting the confidence in the skill. The next one is identity versus identity confusion. And this is in your adolescence, right? This makes sense. Think of that adolescence. They're developing lasting integrated sense of self. They're determining who they are versus who they're not. Like they're discovering things. They're trying out things. They're trying to figure out who they are. Intimacy versus isolation is young adulthood. They want to begin to commit in a loving relationship. So they're developing those really intimate relationships versus being by themselves. Do they need to be with another person? The next one is generativity versus stagnation, and that's middle adulthood. So this is the idea, the challenge is to contribute to younger people through child rearing, child care, or other productive work. So are they being productive? Are they giving back? Or are they just staying the same? So it's something that we'll look at more when we get to middle adulthood. And then the last one is integrity versus despair. And that's a late life. And the challenge is to view one's life as satisfactory and worth living. So it's that idea, is my life worth living, or is life, if I have disabilities or impairments that make my life hard to live? So it's that integrity versus despair. So this is a great picture to put all of those fancy words into perspective. This is Erikson's 8 stages of development in a nutshell. So you can see on the timeline is the actual stages and the person representing, and then on top is one part of the stage and on the bottom is the other. So you can see, and then in the middle it tells you what they have to do, what they're experiencing to get through these stages. So if we look at basic trust versus basic mistrust, and they're doing drive and hope. And then you get to identity, devotion, and fidelity, affiliation, and love. So this is really good way to look and just kind of get to study, to look at the pictures. Always put a person or a picture with the definitions, the stages, and you'll remember it so much better. Can be a lot, 8 stages and all their challenges, but think of that person take a trust issue, like for a baby, and think about them, did you feed them? Okay, that's what that baby is. It's trust versus mistrust. Do I let them cry when they're hungry, or do I give them the bottle? Put a person to the idea so that you'll help you remember. But this is a great just visual to understanding Erikson's stages of development. Let's take a look at the next theory, learning theory. Now, we have all learned something. Learned how to ride a bike, learned how to brush our teeth, learned how to skip, jump rope. Think of all the things that you've learned. Well, how did you do that? How does learning influence a certain behavior? So the key thing you want to take out of this, there are two key learning theories. And we're going to go through each one. You want to know what their theory is and who is associated with them. Those will both be test questions. So let's look at number one, behaviorism. So that's B.F. Skinner. So he's going to be the father of behaviorism. And what he thought about learning is that consequences of your behavior determine whether or not that behavior is repeated in the future. So I want you to think about how you learn. Did you have an older sibling? Did you see them have a negative consequence, get in trouble for something, so you decided not to do it? Or did you see them get rewarded for something and you said, oh, I'm going to do that? That is behaviorism. That looking at the behavior of others or the behavior of you and learning from it. There are three different types of behaviorism, and we're going to go over those. The first one is positive reinforcement. So this would be giving a positive reinforcement to a good behavior. So like getting a gold star for doing all your homework, getting a cookie for eating all your dinner. So it's rewarding a positive behavior with a positive reinforcement. And that is positive reinforcement. So doing something that you want to be done, something that is good, and giving something good in return. The second type of reinforcement is negative reinforcement. And that is taking away something unpleasant as a reward for doing something good. So say that your parents told you that if you get an A on your test, I'm going to take away your chore of taking out the trash. So it's giving your good deed that you did was get an A, and then I'm taking away the negative, which is the unpleasant chore of taking out your trash. So remember, negative reinforcement is taking away something unpleasant for doing something good. So taking away the chore for getting an A. And then the last one is punishment. So a lot of people confuse negative reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement in itself means something is going to be good. So always remember, if there's a reinforcement in it, that something good's going to happen. I'm either going to get something good or something unpleasant is going to be taken away, but it's always a good thing. Punishment is taking away something as a consequence. So we all know what punishment is. So if you misbehaved and you broke curfew, then I'm going to ground you for the weekend. You can't have your car. That's a punishment. It's taking away something or having something, experiencing something unpleasant as a consequence. So punishment is consequence. It's bad activity and you having to have an unpleasant experience because of it. Reinforcement is both good. One is giving something. Positive reinforcement is I'm getting something good, a gold star for doing something good. And negative reinforcement is I'm taking something unpleasant away, doing the chore for doing something good. And that's behaviorism. So it's the three types of theories. You have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and punishment. Social learning theory, which is Albert Bandura's theory, and he believed that learning occurs through imitation or observational learning. So the example I would give you is if a child is watching his mom brushes her teeth, oh, he's going to watch, he's going to see how she holds it, and he's going to mimic her, imitate her, right? That's a form of learning. Um, Another one would be if you saw me walking and trip over the cord and you were right behind me, you learn from my behavior. Oh, there's a cord there. I'm going to pick up my feet. I'm not going to trip over that cord. So his idea is that you just learn from the environment around you. Your social learning through observing people, imitating people, and looking how they respond to the world. So I'm going to, if someone ran that red light, I'm going to stop because I'm going to see, oh, I'm going to observe that. I'm going to know that. So it's all the idea that I'm observing, imitating, and learning from the behaviors of others. But both B.F. Skinner and Bandura are learning theorists, and you want to remember that. So now let's move on to the third theory, cognitive developmental theory. And this is one we're going to be using throughout this course, and it's very important. So what is it? So cognitive developmental theory looks at how people think and how thinking changes over time. There are three distinct theories. So Piaget's theory. So Piaget is what you want to relate to is when you're thinking of cognitive developmental theory. He is the theorist. So Piaget is cognitive developmental. And he believed that children create theories about the world and test them out through experience. And we're going to go explain this a little bit later, but that is his theory in a nutshell. The second one is information processing theory, that human cognition, so human thinking, consists of mental hardware. And so that is like you got your computer, that's your cognitive structure. So all of that brain and everything is basically storing your memory of how you do things. So think of the computer in the memory section, right, of your computer. It has all your memory in there. You put a game on there, it has the memory of it, right? So do you remember how to ride a bike? Do you remember how to brush your teeth? Do you remember, how to cook? That's that cognitive structures. And it also, you have your mental software. So that's your set of cognitive processes. So cognitive processes basically is the skill, bringing the memory to skill. So I remember how to ride a bike, but can I actually ride a bike? Can I bring that memory and put all the components together? Can I put my arms in the right place? Can I balance? Can I actually perform the task? I may remember how to do it, but can I actually do it? And that's that connection. So that mental software are then the connections. I have the program, but can I pull it up and actually run and do everything in the program? So if you're thinking about that computer, you have your memory, you pull the program up. If your cognitive processes or your soft hardware, then that program's not going to work right. So when we think of this question, do mental hardware and software improve with age? What do you think? I think to a point, you're going to get to as you develop, right? You're going to become better than when you were 2, then when you hit 40, you're going to be much better, right? But then it's going to go down again when you get older as the memory centers of your brain deteriorate. You may not have as good as memory to it of the activity of having to ride a bike. And then your connections to the task. So that's cognitive process. Those connections slow down. So something to think about, our mental and software, how we use it and how it goes through age. So the thing I want you to remember is that information processing theory is that cognitive structure. So it's memory. And how do we bring that memory into skill? And that's the set of cognitive process. Another important theorist in the cognitive developmental theory that you need to pay attention to is Vygotsky's theory. And he believed that every aspect of a child's development must be considered against the backdrop of culture. So I want you to think about your own life and the life of your friends and your family. What influences you? Does your family have specific values, beliefs, customs, skills? Are they associated with a culture or things handed down from generation to generation? How has that affected the way you look at the world and the way you think? Could you separate that? Probably not. We are all influenced by the generations before us. So that is what Vygotsky's theory is. That's the transmission from one generation to the next of a culture's values, beliefs, customs, and skills. So it makes us who we are. by the generations above us, right? He also believed that cooperative dialogues between children and more expert members of society happens when you have these generational, influences. So you're going to be talking to your elder, which is the more of the expert in society, right? Your grandparents, your parents, and you're going to be passing on, having these dialogues, and you're going to be passing on these beliefs. So that begs the question, do Americans value education more than some cultures? Well, let's look at the research. So the research defines a split even among American families. So in the Chinese American culture, a great degree of value is placed on education, the high investment and sacrifice they feel they need to offer, and the more direct intervention approach to the children's schooling and learning is key. So they really value formal education. When they looked at European Americans, they primarily expressed a negation of the importance of academics or academic skills. And instead, they looked at the importance of social skills, or a less directive approach to learning, explained under the facilitative model. And they were more concerned for building their children's self-esteem. So even if you look in the American, there are many different cultures and beliefs. We're divided in that sense too. So depending on the cultures that they were raised in will determine their value of what type of education, right? It's a very big blanketed term. So I want you to think about society as general. If you're thinking about countries that value education, and you think about the United States, as we learned here in the Chinese American, right? So we think about China or Japan or Korea, they have a very high installation of formal education, long hours in formal education. So that's a high value priority. Where in America, we may have more social activities. So think about that and how that influences your development depending on what environment, what culture you are being raised in. So this is a picture of Jean Piaget. Remember, he's our cognitive development theory main guy. So let's kind of go over what he thought. So his biggest theories are that children construct their understanding of the world through their active involvement and interactions. And he determined this by conducting studies of his 3 children to focus not on what they knew, but how they knew it. So he didn't want to know what they did. He wanted to know, okay, well, why did you do that? And he described children's understanding as their schemas and how they use assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation, according to Piaget, is taking in information that is compatible with what is already known, so you assimilate it. Accommodation is changing existing knowledge based on new knowledge. So if I knew that brushing my teeth, I brushed it up and down very softly, but then I saw, oh, if I brush it sideways and harder, I'll get my teeth cleaner. So I'm taking in that new information and changing the way my behavior is. We're going to take a look at his stages in the next slide. So let's take a look at Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development. So in this table, you're going to see that there's a stage, an age, and he has a characteristic associated with it. So you're going to want to know these, this whole table. You're going to want to know it, understand it. It's going to be on the test. So sensory motor is birth to 2 years old. And basically that is taking in the world, right? Sensory and motor aspects. What do we do? Think of your baby, that 0 to 2 year old. Think of all the behaviors they do and what they are learning, right? But its infant knowledge of the world is based on senses and motor skills. So they're touching, they're feeling, they're moving, they're learning how to roll, to crawl, to stand, to walk, feeling things, eating, all that sensory and motor stuff. They're taking in the world to develop knowledge about it. So by the end of this period, they're getting a mental representation of what the world around them and what their sensory and their motor behavior and how that affects it. So that's the sensory motor stage. Pre-operational thought is 2 to 6 years. And that's when the child learns how to use symbols such as words and numbers to represent aspects of the world, but relates to the world only through his or her perspective. So think of your 2 to 6-year-old. So they're learning. What are they learning in this time? So they're learning how to play. They're learning how to talk, right? They're learning what symbols are, what a square, what a triangle is. They're learning how to read and beginning to write. So what is the symbol of a word that I say and what does it look like written? So they're learning all those aspects. But during this stage, what we consider the pre-operational stage, they're very egocentric. So think of your 2-year-old toddler. What's their favorite word to say? No. And what is it all about? Me. So I want you to think pre-operational thought is the me stage. Me, me, me. And everything revolves around me. It's the world according to how I see it. That's 2 to 6. The third stage is concrete operational thought. So this is your 7-year to early adolescence, so 12 or 13. So I want you to picture that child. They're 7-year-old to 13. It's a lot of different between a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old, right? So what happens during that process? So the child begins to understand and applies logic to experiences, provided they are focused on the here and now. So they're very in the moment. So they don't think about the future. They can't think about the what ifs. They're very in the moment, but they can start to understand logic of things, why things happen. If I do, if I kick the ball and if I, it'll go so far this distance. They can start to reasoning and planning out. So think of that 7 to 12-year-old. They're starting to put things together. They can put real situations and actually have an opinion about it, start to be influenced by their appearance, right? So they're starting to see like, oh, if I, wear nice clothes, if I do my hair, then I get more attention. So they can start to put all those connections together. That is the concrete operational thought. And the biggest thing you want to take out of that is they begin to see logic. They can understand A plus B equals C. Even if they don't see B, they know that that will happen. And the last stage is formal operational thought. And this is adolescence and beyond. So this is a huge stage. So you want to think about adolescents, and you want to picture them in your head, or an adult. And you want to think that they can begin to think abstractly, right? They deal with hypothetical situations. They can plan for their future, and they can speculate about what might be possible. So if I ask an 8-year-old, what's going to happen in a year, they may not be able to tell you, or they may tell you something that's not realistic or logical. But if I ask a 14-year-old, what's going to happen in 5 years, they can hypothesize and make conclusions because now they can think abstractly. They can think about the what ifs. Well, if I go to college, I'm going to be doing this. If I get a job, if I get an apartment. A 7 and 12-year-old, not so much. So that's the big difference, is that abstract thinking and hypothetical situations. I'm going to attach a video in the videos it will show examples of each of these 4 stages. So watch them so that you can see the difference as they go through the stages. They're going to do the same activity and you're going to see how they vary between activity and how that stages. And it makes it a lot more sense when you can see it in the video. So watch that in the extra videos. So this video will be put up in the extra videos for you to watch on all the 4 stages of cognitive development. So make sure you watch these. Let's now take a look at the ecological and systems perspective. So this theory believes that development is inseparable from the environment in which a person develops. So what does that mean? It means that we don't live in a bubble, that society and everything that we go through daily influences us, be at home, at school, at work. We can't get away from the environmental influences in our development. So how would an ecological theorist explain an American teenager's behavior? So, right, he would see it as the environment affecting the teenager's behavior, right? TV, social media, parents, friends, church, all of that together would affect how that teenager's behavior. That's what an ecological theorist would explain an American teenager's behavior. Let's look at the two examples of this approach. So we have Bronfenbrenner. So remember him. He's going to be connected to this ecological and systems perspective. And that is definitely, those will be test questions. The theorist to the theory. So Bronfenbrenner's theory is that people are embedded into 4 levels of the environment. And we're going to go over that in the next slides. And the other approach is competence environmental press theory. And that is a good match between competence and environmental press is best for development. So what that means is, does the ability match the environment? So if a child has great agility and coordination, is he being matched with art or baseball? So if he was put into an art class, is that matching his competency? No, we're going against it. So the competence environmental press theory, you want to look at it like that. Think of that child, think of what he does best, and then matching it with the actual skill. So if he's good at math, I'm putting him in a math, extra math clinic, math club. If he's good at sports, agility, I'm putting him in baseball and basketball. If he's very athletic and I put him in an art class, I am not doing the competence environmental press theory. Because what they believe is you match the skill with the activity and you will get the best development of that skill. So this is the ecological and systems perspective of Bronfenbrenner's theory. So this is in a picture to understand how it interacts with each other. So let's go through those 4 levels of environment and understand how they interact with each other. So the first one is we have the microsystem, and you can see it's right in the middle, and it is basically the people that are in your core. It's your parents and the child, so it's a small interaction. It's the people and the objects in that immediate environment. So parent to child interaction, that's that microsystem, small environment. The second is the mesosystem. And you're going to see that we're including the next dimension. So think of your child. Where else do you go? School, friends. So now you're beginning to interact between child to school, child to friends, parents to school. So you're getting that other interaction, right? The third one is the exosystem, and that's the third ring. So that's parents, places of employment, government, and social policy. So one influence in this exosystem would be a government policy that gives kids free lunches. The parents' social network, their group of friends. So we're increasing the amount of influence on that parent and child. So think about where the parent works, where they're social, their friends, the government social policies, how that affects like free lunches or after school programs. That's all the exosystem. And then the last one is the macro system, and it's historical events, ethnic group, culture. So that's that very large influence that we have. So again, it's your church. It's it's your your culture, the way your extended cultural activities. If you belong to like the Hispanic or club or something like that's that macro system, or you belong to the Chinese American cultural center. Those are that macro system. Are we taking in that how our culture, our bigger group, our ethnic groups, how that taking that all into consideration? Now, historical event is something that you would all share together. So let's say if you were all in Ridgecrest during the Ridgecrest earthquake, everybody in Ridgecrest is sharing that historical event. That is a macro system. So you're sharing a common event. That's an historical event. You all shared it together if you lived in Ridgecrest. So it's bringing in that, those large, broad areas and how that influences us. So you can see in this picture how one can influence each other. So parents influence child and child influences parents. And you can see the exosystem influences the mesosystem and the exosystem influences the macrosystem. So it doesn't just all directly work on each other. We as individuals, as the child, can actually affect those, historical events. We can affect our school. So it's not a one-dimensional, it's a communication type perspective. So you make sure you know the 4 different types, understand who are in each type and how do they influence each other. Here's another great picture of that same system, but let's actually put some people in there and some things that we use. So this is a great one if you want to look at to understand. Remember, put a picture to all these theories, put a person to the person you're describing, and you're going to remember the concepts a lot better. So you can see that microsystem is the child, and you can see how that goes to the immediate family, into the mesosystem, and then you have your exosystem as the extended family, your friends, your neighbors, your workforce, and then you can see that macrosystem, the laws, the values, the customs, and remember that historical event. So this is a great picture to see how we kind of all affect each other and to remember the people in those systems. So now let's look at lifelong development perspective. Can you understand a person without knowledge of his or her life experiences? Just remember this saying when you're thinking of this lifelong development perspective. Can you judge someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes? Lifespan perspective development cannot be understood in the scope of one framework. One must appreciate an adult's childhood and adolescence in order to understand them. So think about it. If you met a person and they were rude to you and you're thinking, gosh, that person is just a rude person. But do you really know their history? What about if in childhood they were, they had a traumatic experience with going out in public, or something happened in middle adulthood that made them the way they are? Do we really know a person just by their interaction we have presently? The lifelong development perspective would say no. To really understand a person, you must take into consideration everything that has happened through their whole life into making them the person that they are, and that just that the person they are in that moment does not define them. There are 4 central features of lifespan development perspective. So Baltz and Smith are you going to think of. There's multidirectionality, plasticity, historical context, and multiple causation. Multidirectionality involves growth and decline. An individual may grow in one area and decline in another at different rates. So when you think of a toddler, they may grow physically faster. So a kid that can walk early but not talk, maybe. So that is multidirectionality. And some growths may need to stop or decline for another to grow. So if they kind of stop growing a little bit, so then they're forced to learn their verbal skills. So basically, it just means that it involves growth and decline, and an individual may grow in one area and decline in another at different rates. So think of that toddler walking and talking and not necessarily doing it at the same time. Plasticity is not predetermined skills, can be learned and improved with practice. Even late in life, second professions at retirement are a perfect example. So when you think of plasticity, it's just the ability to change. So our brain has plasticity. That means that we can learn and adapt. So we can learn a new skill, we can adapt by practice. So that's plasticity. So if I think about a stroke patient and they can't move their arm well, that brain is plastic, so it's going to change and adapt to the skill. So I'm going to practice normal movement. I'm going to practice using that arm again, and that's plasticity. So we can definitely, skills can be learned and improved, even into older age. Historical context. People develop within the circumstances of time. So basically, the time that you're born matters. So think about you now and the time that you are in. Think about if you were born in 1920. Would you be the same person? Would you be doing the same things? That's what historical context means. So think about, that time you put you in a different time, would you be the same person? So historical context matters. 1920s versus 1920s. I mean, 1920s versus 2020. Your development's going to be different because the context of history that you're in, society and all the rules is different. And multiple causation. Development occurs from biological, psychosocial, and social cultural life forces. So that's that model that we looked at earlier. That's that multiple causation. So you're thinking about your physical is your growth, your psychological, which is your personality, your intellect, the social cultural, all those mental factors that your parents, your grandparents had affect you, and then the lifespans. The timing is everything. I mean, life's forces. When you think of life forces, timing is everything. So that multiple causation is that biological, psychosocial, social, cultural, and life forces. The next thing, selective optimization with compensation model. So that's the next lifelong development perspective. And what they believe is selection, compensation, and optimization form a system of behavioral actions with regards to aging. So the first one is selection. So selecting is continuing with the same or similar goals or substituting new goals. So my goal is to walk a mile to stay healthy. So I can continue with that goal to stay healthy, and I can substitute, new goals for that in its place. So instead of walking, I could say I'm going to run to stay healthy. I'm going to ride the bicycle to stay healthy. So I'm keeping with the same or similar goal. I'm just substituting the way I do it. And that's selecting. Compensation is it can't function well in a particular domain, so a search is made for an alternative way to achieve the goal. So in easy to understand terms, maybe I can't walk anymore, right? So I'm gonna ride that bike. I'm gonna compensate, or I can't walk anymore, so I'm gonna use my cane so I can keep walking that mile to stay healthy. I have to compensate the way I do that goal. I have to change my behavior because I can't function like I normally would when I selected the goal. And optimization is the best match between resources and goal. So say that I still want to walk to stay healthy, right? But it rains all the time and the terrain is really unsafe. So how am I going to optimize myself to make that goal? I can get a treadmill. So now I've optimized that goal. I can't do what I usually did outside, but I can optimize it by getting that treadmill to match my goal. So I got the resource to match my goal. So that's optimization. So basically you're continuing with the same or similar goal, and you're just substituting new goals as they come. So basically you're doing that walk to stay healthy. You may change the walking to running, to using the Stairmaster, to the cycling, but your goal is staying very similar to stay healthy, just doing other activities to stay healthy. That's selecting. Compensation is maybe I can't walk very well anymore. I need a cane to keep walking to help me. I have to compensate. I have to change the way I do or reach that goal. That's compensation. And then optimization is just matching the resources with that goal. So like I moved to a new city, the weather is awful, the terrain's awful, it's very unsafe for me to go out and walk. I need to match my resources. Oh, I buy a treadmill, or I go to the gym to walk now. I'm keeping the same goal. I'm just optimizing the resources to achieve it. So now let's look at life course perspective. How do various generations experience the biopsychosocial forces of development in their lives? Consider the interplay between individual and society. So do young people today tend to marry at the same age as people of 75 years ago? No, right? We tend to get married younger. I mean, we tend to wait to get married. So why do you think that? What are the contributing factors? So research from the life course perspective has clearly shown major life transitions, marriage, starting a family, beginning an Indian career, and education occur at different ages across people and generations. The reason why it may be starting later is what society has changed a lot. More access to education, uh, more women in the workforce, right? So people waiting to have kids are working first. So careers are more important. More access to um, medical care. We're living longer. We have more choices. Economic situations. So we all those things affect why we make the decisions. The changes in society. Income, poverty. Um, the way we view, women and our rights and, just the income, all that stuff affect our choices. So 75 years ago, again, a whole different perspective than today. So now I want you to look, this is the big picture. So we talked about a lot of theories, a lot of theorists during this lecture, but I want you to now look at the big picture. This is a great table to help you understand. Use this to study, use this to look at so you can understand the differences between each theory. So you have the psychodynamic, which we know is the psychosocial theory. So we want to think Erikson. Main ideas: personality develops through sequence of stages. And the fourth emphasis in this biopsychosocial framework: psychological, social, and life cycle forces crucial, less emphasis on biological, and then the positions on developmental issues. So remember, this is nature-nurture interaction, discontinuity, universal sequence of stages, context-specific differences in rates. So you can look at this table and understand what the differences is. Learning, right? Behaviorism is Skinner and Bandura, and that's reinforcement, punishment, consequences, imitation, observing. And then you can go on and see the positions on development. They strongly nurture continuity, universal principles of learning. Cognitive development. Who do we think of? Piaget. So this is great, right? I told you you're going to really need to know who these people are who are behind the theories. So cognitive development we know is Piaget, and his thinking develops in a sequence of stages. So the main emphasis: biological and sociocultural forces, less on psychological, little on life cycle. So it's going to let you know. And the main thing, the positions on developmental issues. Strongly nature, discontinuity, universal sequence of stages. And then it takes the other parts of the cognitive development. We look at information processing theory, and we look at Vygotsky's theory. So you can see the differences in between those. So look at this big picture to study. Use this table to study for your exam, and it'll help you understand a lot. And this is just the second part of that table. So you're going to look at ecological and systems, everything that we talk about, Brofenbrenners, competence environmental press, Balt's proposals, life course. So then look at it and then look at what they emphasize and what their positions on. So it really, really pulls it all together. It's a lot. I know this is a lot of theories to understand. So bring this table up, look at your chapter notes, look at your notes from this, and to understand the differences. So when you're studying, you won't get them confused and you can have them right in front of you. All right, so this concludes the first part of chapter 1. Lecture. I'm going to do the second part of research and design. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. Put them in the email me or the frequently asked box discussion group. You will have some questions from this and your 5-question attendance. Make sure you do that 5-question attendance so you get credit for the class, for attendance this week in the class. And I will look forward to talking to you on the research design. All right, take care.